If there's something I've discovered that LARPers love, it's having little leather badges and dangly bits to hang off their belts. These are an example of one that I made last year for the healers that I served with at the Weekend Warrior experience. But this year we have more healers, so I need to make more badges. Join me down the rabbit hole as I create more leather LARP badges. Now, I might not be much of an artist, but I am a craftsman. So I reached out to one of the other healers in the faction, and they're the ones that designed this logo. Here you can see the first set of badges I finished. I used the laser on my Snapmaker 3-in-1 printer to etch the design onto the leather, then used more traditional techniques to finish the pieces off. I'm using the application that came with my Snapmaker called Luban. The first thing I need to do is bring in a circle, which will show me where to cut out the badge later on. I resized that to the size I want my badge to be, which for these is about 65 millimeters across. Once I bring that in and get it to the right size, I then import the healer graphic and size it to make sure that it fits the way I want to inside of the badge. So I have the design, now I need the leather. I want the final pieces to be about 3 millimeters thick, so I grab the scrap bin and look for pieces the right thickness and size for this project. I'm trying to find pieces I can fit multiple badges onto so I don't need to change the leather out after each one. Once I have what I need, I'll place the first piece of leather onto the Snapmaker. I don't have an enclosure for my Snapmaker, so when I do laser engraving, I keep it out in the garage. With this scrap leather, you may be wondering, how do I make sure that the badge ends up on the right spot? Well, one of the features of the Snapmaker is that the laser head has a camera that can be used to visualize where the leather is on the platform. Once I see that, I can move where the badge is going to print at to make sure that I use the leather piece effectively. And with all of that done, it's time to send it to the laser for it to do its thing. And here we see what it looks like when it's finished. I want to put some other badges on here as well, so now it's time to go back to the software, capture another image of the leather as it currently is, and then move the design around so that I can place the next one in the right spot. I don't put it right up against the other one, as I'm always a little worried the camera may be off a little bit. But once we have that positioned where we want it, we send that to the Snapmaker and let it go again. This is sped up quite a bit. For a design like this, it takes 3 to 4 minutes for it to finish etching. With the modern parts done, it's now time to get to the more traditional leatherworking skills. I decided I want to do a little tooling to help the shield, bone, and bone saw stand out on the badge. First step is to wet the leather so that it's easier to work with. This is referred to as casing the leather. I sharpen my swivel knife and then start to cut around these big features. For the teeth of the saw, I'm not worried about carving them all out individually. I just do a single line underneath the blade. Also, you'll notice that I'm doing this even before I cut the badges out of the scrap pieces of leather. That's because when I tool them, it is much easier to do this on a bigger piece. Once I carve the leather, it's time to bevel it. I'm just using a textured beveler I picked up from Tandy Leather. I use the black leather bag to keep the piece from moving around. It's full of lead shot to make it nice and heavy for its size. Now for the first batch, I cut the badges out before doing this part, and you can see me struggling to keep the pieces in place even with the bag. Tooling them before cutting them out worked much better. You'll also see that I'm doing this on top of a marble slab. It really helps to get good impressions on the leather with the tooling by doing it on top of a big solid surface like this. With the tooling all done, it's time to finally cut the pieces out. I'll sharpen the box cutter I use for cutting out the leather before I cut it out. Having a sharp knife always makes it a little easier to do. Here I'm using the edge beveler to round the edges of the badges. It works well on the front of the leather, but I had trouble doing the back of them on these rounded pieces. The better the quality of the leather and the straighter it is, the easier it is when you're trying to edge the back like this. With that done, I punch the holes for the strap to go through, and then it's time to dye them. I'm using a saddle tan dye here for the shield and an oxblood for the border and the back of the badges. For the front, it's much easier to use a paintbrush to apply the dye to just where you want it. I'm leaving the bone and the bone saw undyed to give it a little bit more variation. To stain the back, I'm just using a cotton dauber. It excels at getting the larger areas like this. It's all I use for projects that don't need the detail work like we have on the front. After a little drying time, it's time to finish them off. The first part is to burnish the edges so that they'll be smooth. I'm using Tokonole here, and it really makes these edges glass smooth. This has to be done after they are dyed, as the dye won't penetrate it after I've put the Tokonole on it. Also, I'm not using a ton of pressure with the slicker either, as it's more the friction than the pressure that helps with this. In addition to doing the sides, I'm also using the Tokonole on the back. Some of this leather is a little rough on the backside, and using something like the Tokonole here really helps. I'm using a small piece of tempered glass with slightly rounded edges to apply the pressure evenly to it. Now, if we don't put a finish on these, there's a risk that some of the dye will rub off onto people's kit, and they will not like that. So I seal these with Resolene, which is a flexible acrylic coating. I'm just using an old white t-shirt for the rag to apply this, and it works better if the rag is a little wet before getting the Resolene on it. And I'm doing front and back of all the pieces. Now just to cut out the leather cord, tie the end into a knot, and loop it around the badge. And we're done! And so that's how I created these leather LARP badges. I think my fellow healers are really going to enjoy these. Join me next time, YouTube, as we do more crafting down the rabbit hole.